Good morning 6th class students. So today welcome to online class. So we are dealing with the lesson called as animals and their food. In our previous class we learned about the rumination. So what we learned about the rumination? Ruminants are the animals that they take the food inside quickly and they swallow it and keep in one part of the stomach. When they are free, when they are sitting simply, then they get back their food and they will start chewing. The type of the process is called as rumination and you call that energy from sun, derived from the sun. So here sun directly the energy it is used by the plants in order to produce the food. So they are called as producers. The name itself it is indicating producing. They are synthesizing their own food. So the organisms that prepare their own food material, here the energy that consume